Hello everybody, my name is Craig Fidenich and I'm going to be talking to you on behalf of the Nero Infinity Rules team. I'm going to be going over a lot of the sort of design decisions that were influencing our process. A lot of the things that we took into consideration, as well as the principles we were trying to enact, and what exactly we were trying to clean up or keep about the old system. So the first thing I'm going to go over in this video is the list of problems that we had to fix with this rule set. And the first thing that we're going to be talking about is how the game was never designed for continuous play. Nero as a system is based off of old-style episodic game systems like D&D, where everybody starts at the beginning of the story, you run through and gain power and magical items, and then the story ends. Or everybody forgets about it and you start a new campaign. This is good because generally all of your players are together, they play at the same time, they stay at about the same power level, and then the game starts over again, which keeps them about the same power level. We need to change away from this style of model because it doesn't allow for a continuous game design. With everybody skewed about and everybody falling into a different power level as the game and story progress, there's no way that people are going to be able to maintain the same amount of agency. Certain challenges will be too hard or too easy based off of where your positioning is. And the longer the game runs, the wider this disparity. To fix this problem, we're attempting to use a method of modeling that area that's right in between too hard and too easy, and we're calling it the challenge threshold. Now, ideally, we want all of our players to fall inside of this threshold, and we tried to make a bunch of adjustments in order to make sure that happens. The intention is to keep the rules from segregating our player base and preventing player interactions. We really want players to be able to interact in ways that they couldn't before, and also bring value to the table no matter who they are. With the old system, as players gain more power, they continue to push their own challenge threshold up and up and up and up, to the point where newer players fall out the bottom. So anything the older player goes on is going to be too hard for the new guy. So to fix this problem and keep everybody in the same challenge threshold, we've got a new type of design that's called the Elasticap. So the way the Elasticap is going to work is your new players are going to start out at the bottom, and they're going to go up and up and up as per normal, and then they're going to start to slow down towards the top of it. That's going to be similar to the soft cap that most people are going to be familiar with. After a point, you're going to hit the top, and you're going to float there. And you can spend build to pop up above that cap and have more skills above that cap than you would normally have, but it's going to strain you and you're going to fall back to that cap. Or you can hang out under that cap, store up build, and then pop up to that cap. So players on the high end are actually bobbing up and down and taking turns being the most powerful character on the board. But fundamentally, nobody's going to exit the challenge threshold. And that's going to keep our new players able to contribute in a way that they couldn't before, and everybody's going to have value in our storylines as a result. Additionally, and as mentioned earlier, this is important to prevent player isolation, especially for new players. We want our new players to have agency and be able to affect the fight, but we also want to respect the growth of older characters and show that they've developed something unique. So implementing this system, we fundamentally changed the backbone of the entire game, and we think it's going to really enrich all of our player interactions as a result. Because now we're not going to have those artificial barriers that get in the way of storytelling. So now that we've got everybody in the same challenge threshold, the next challenge is actually figuring out what we're modeling. The thing about LARP, at least most LARPs that you're playing, is that it's actually a game of tag. It's about how many times do I need to tag the other guy with the sword, or how many times do I need to hit them with a packet before I win. The numbers are just there to model how the tags function, so the numbers were what we're going to look at next for how we can try to fix that challenge threshold problem. One of the things that high repetitive damage does in the old system is constantly push the number of tags you need lower and lower. Because the number of tags you need are constantly being pushed lower and lower, your difficulty is getting less and less because you go from approximately 5 tags necessary to win to 4, to 3, to 2, and then to 1. And that's problematic, because bad guys on the other side are constantly having to increase their numbers to compensate for this growth. It's throwing off all of our challenge modeling in terms of numbers. Our fix to this is going to make a lot of our numbers consistent. You won't get high repetitive damage, you're going to get bursts and abilities of damage or unique damage types. It's going to be more of a game of play and counterplay with high impact abilities as opposed to a high sustained effectiveness. This fixes the problem of constantly pushing the numbers up and up, which adjusts the challenge threshold because all of our numbers are now going to be uniform. This is going to be better for low-level players because they're not going to be isolated because they simply can't produce the numbers, and it's also going to remove plot teams' dependency on numbers to tell story because using numbers to tell story is a very clunky story mechanic. Numbers have always been a crutch for telling characters about their progression, as opposed to using story events and character motivations to sort of describe exactly how their character is progressing. And ideally, because we're no longer using those numbers to represent that story progression, it should create more natural and intuitive story designs for people to immerse themselves in. Along a similar vein, we're making a change to mages, because fundamentally, as mages leveled up, they got more and more and more ammunition or bullets to fire. The problem with a lot of these bullets is that they're binary. They win or they don't. And that leads to a lot of high binary shields, I block it or I don't. To fix this problem, we're adding in more low-power crowd control effects, things like Wither Limb and Disarm, as well as shuffling them around in the system. And ideally, this is going to create a more low-power game of spells that can be thrown out in a larger quantity. We're going to maintain those high-power binary effects, but we're going to make them more limited so that when they're used, they're going to have more impact. Additionally, because we're lowering the stockpile of spells that a caster has, the mobs that they're going up against will have fewer defenses, and as a result, their spells will have more impact when they throw them. We're trying to get rid of the double tap and triple tap mentality of casters so that when they throw a spell, it has the impact that's desired. In order to do so, we had to reduce the number of things they're throwing in order for them to have that impact. We feel that for casters, being able to throw that thing and have it connect is going to be more valuable than the stockpile of things it's not going to be able to connect, especially when you're depending on your high-end spells instead of your low-end spells to have that sort of power and agency in the game. This also fixes a lot of problems like with the healing system, because the healing system in Nero and a lot of LARPs has always been another style of crutch. The reason being is that most game systems are built off of damage to act as the backbone of the game system for telling when players win and when players lose. Damage fundamentally is that force that pushes against players that tells them you're approaching the loss condition and then secures the loss condition. Healing is that force that says, no, you can keep playing, and it delays the loss condition. It really does nothing else but delay the loss condition. So one of the things we had to do in order to give players that high impact is we have to scale back their ability to delay the loss condition. And what that means is we have to have less healing in the system. It means healing is going to still be that important sort of game-changing mechanic, but because it's going to be limited and used in a limited way, it's going to be high impact and high reward. But it can't be used all day like it used to be because it caused all sorts of problems. The biggest one being that on the other side of the system, it was almost impossible for game runners to tell how challenging a module was. The reason being is that all of your casters had a nondescript amount of healing that they could throw, and if you didn't know exactly where that cutoff was, you'd find out that your entire group just got TPK'd. Either that, or they simply wouldn't drop. There would be no risk to the module, there would be no way to threaten the players, they would just stay standing, and then they win. So we had to tone back healing to sort of give a finer control over that, as well as to advance some other sort of design philosophies that we really wanted to push forward. The biggest one being, we wanted to remove healers as a must-have dominant strategy. Any game that leans too heavily on your healers in order to function is going to require them in order to be able to play the game. And that's simply because all of your difficulty threshold is based on exactly how long the players can delay their loss condition. So scaling back healing, we can implement additional game mechanics, like a revamp of the armor system, that's going to give players the ability to actually play the game and make healers optional as opposed to mandatory. We think that's going to be a lot more fun for the rogues and fighters when they're not wholly dependent on getting a healer in order to be able to play. It also means that you're going to be able to mix and match new strategies, such as one of the casters is going to be more focused on damage prevention as opposed to damage curing. These changes are going to drastically give players more freedom for team composition and team strategies that was previously not available in the system. Additionally, it's going to grant a little bit more importance to the item system, which is going to have its own rework that we'll get into in another video. Anyway, the fundamental of all these different reworks is going to be giving players more options and ways they can play the game and making sure that all of these options are viable. as opposed to Nero's 4 main strategies. Either you do all the damage to the front, you do all the damage to the back, you do all the healing, or you throw all the binary crowd control effects. That's just not the way we wanted the game to play. We wanted a lot of different ways to play the game, and we think it's going to be more rewarding for players, especially even your social players that are going to have more viable strategies as a result. So getting into exactly how players have agency in the new rules set and exactly what measure they have for how much they can interact in the world, we've implemented a new energy system. You're going to have 2 major types. You'll have stamina or energy. The stamina is stuff you're going to get back anytime you rest, and that's going to be whenever you take like a restful action that we mentioned in the rulebook specifically. But the gist is, you go sit down in the tavern, you catch your breath, you step out of the tavern, you're refreshed and ready to go. Your energy is your high impact things, like death spells and slays. You're also not going to have to worry about keeping track of too many numbers, because there's only going to be 3 major types of energy, 1 for your scholars, 1 for your fighters, and 1 for your rogues. And that's going to come back every day. So you're constantly going to have a refreshing of small ways that you're going to be able to change the flow of battle, and then your per a day resource is going to be ways that you can drastically change the flow of battle. And those are going to be really high impact, and they're going to be high reward as a result. Because we've implemented the stamina system, and we've got a consistent source of refreshing abilities, but we've still got a finite cap on the number of things that can be thrown, we aren't going to have to depend on our plot teams to reset player skills, because we've explicitly designed how players are going to get their skills back in the game now. The old system was kind of a problem because players got more and more ammunition that they stockpiled. So the first sort of fights of the day, you were just absolutely stacked. There was no real way that you could lose. But at the end of the day, you had a random amount of things that you could use, and Plot really didn't know, so they had to create bailout mechanics like mass resurrections or resets for abilities, because they simply could not predict what to give players a challenge with. Because the new system has such a finite control on your breadth of abilities, while also giving you more potent abilities, we don't have to worry about allowing Plot to reset as much. It's going to create a more consistent challenge for players, and it's going to be more predictable on the player side as well as on the Plot side. Additionally, in order to help deal with the cost on Plot side as well as the player side of the loss condition, we've removed the bailout mechanics and also changed the way that death is going to fundamentally work. Previously, you had a soft loss condition, which was a bleed out state, and then a hard loss condition, which was death. And because you went so quickly from the soft condition to the hard condition, the game system had to flood the game with a massive number of life spells in order to compensate for that loss condition. By extending the soft condition, we've extended the bleed out time to 5 minutes and the death time to 5 minutes. We've increased that soft state so we can have fewer of the corrections for the hard state later. And what I mean by that is because you're going to spend more time in the bleed out count and have more ways to deal with the bleed out count, we can reduce the number of life spells and actually give people that risk. In addition to changing the frequency of life spells, we're also editing the death system. There were a number of psychological problems as well as mechanical problems with the old death system. The biggest psychological problem is the amount of anxiety that the old death system created in players. You would die, and then you would sit, and you would sit, and you would sit, and you would sit. And this whole time you would continue to build anxiety, and then at the end of that anxiety, you either lost everything or nothing happened and you were anxious for no reason. Both of these outcomes are not ideal for the death system because you want it to be both a part of the character progression as well as a simple loss condition, not necessarily the end of the world. To make this change, we're making death more predictable, which is going to take a lot of the penalty away from it, but it's going to be a cumulative style of penalty. This is for 2 big reasons. Because we want death to be a constant presence and a worry for the character, not necessarily the player, as well as we want the player to have control over when their story is going to end. You can perm your character at any time along this cycle. The good thing about this new system is you know exactly where the end of the cycle is going to be before your character is permed. To do this, we've implemented a number of different death systems. The first one, that's going to be a lot closer to the old system, is going to involve a bead draw of about 1 to 6. As soon as you draw the bead, you're going to be on your last life, as opposed to having permed. The other death systems are going to have a fixed amount of length for a number of deaths, but they're going to impose a stacking penalty or some sort of scarring system that's going to affect how your character is going to play from that point onwards. It could be things like a war wound, it could be you now have a form of amnesia constantly, or some other negative penalty that's going to continue to stack until your character is ushered off the stage. This is to give players an incentive to start creating another character and start wrapping up their story, or to start working on changing their story, because we'll also have a ritual system that allows you to reroll your character and continue to play the same character, but you're going to lose a certain amount of build and also change the way that you need to play that character in exchange for that. So I think that's going to wrap up a lot of the big changes that we were attempting to make with this new system. This has been an overall meta view of what we were trying to do. In the future, we'll be releasing a couple recordings that are going to explain some of the nuance of each of these subsystems, like the damage system, the healing system, how mages are going to function, how crafting works. We hope to release these recordings in the coming weeks, and we hope you're looking forward to playing the alpha game system. So on behalf of the Nero Infinity Rules Committee, I would like to say thank you for listening, and have a good day.